Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of Temple of Aaron exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, and the Rabbinical Assembly. Today is the first day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 15th of Sivan, 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Sunday, May 31st, 2026. We will read Parashat Beha'alotcha this coming Shabbat. Let's begin. Me'am Loez. New week, new parsha. Parashat Beha'alotcha, we will be on this week, and we will read in Shabbat this week as well. So the first couple of verses, first two verses of Parashat Beha'alotcha goes, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, Daber el Haron v'amart alav Beha'alotcha et hanerot el mul pnei menorah, ya'iru shivat hanerot. God spoke to Moses, telling him to speak to Aaron and say to him, when you light the lamps, the 7 lamps shall illuminate the menorah. This is the first couple of verses of the Parsha, and it narrates really and instructs Aaron how to light the menorah in the temple. Now, this is not the, of course, menorah of Hanukkah, which actually the real name is a Chanukiah. Right? A Chanukiah has 9 branches, 4 on each side, 1 in the middle, while the temple menorah, the menorah that would be inside of the temple, had 7 branches, 1 in the middle, 3 on each side. So that's what we mean here by the 7 lamps shall illuminate the menorah. But there's often a beautiful midrash that is brought here, and it's brought in Rashi as well as when I first came aware of it. But it's really a beautiful midrash, and it's one of these ideas that I think often sticks in my head. So I'm going to teach it today because it's brought so beautifully in the Me'am Loez right at the beginning. The Midrash relates that Aaron was deeply distressed when he saw that 11 tribes plus Ephraim had brought offerings, but God had not instructed the tribe of Levi to do the same. The missing information we're sort of missing here is that towards the end of Parshat Naso is a long section of each tribal chieftain bringing gifts for the inauguration of the Beit HaMikdash. It's one of the reasons we actually read that portion during Hanukkah, actually. Hanukkah is the holiday of the rededication of the temple, so we read how the chieftains dedicated the Mishkan originally. But we read this long, kind of repetitive section of all of these gifts that the chieftains were able to bring to the tabernacle. And according to the Midrash, Aaron really was deeply distressed about this because he really wanted to bring a gift or an offering, just like the other tribal chieftains did, because since, of course, he's the tribal chieftain of Levi, of the tribe of Levi. And he was worried that there was something bad because he was not asked to bring a gift or invited to bring a gift at that time. And he actually thinks it's on account of me, he reflected. This tribe at whose head I stand has not presented an offering, because I bear the blame for the golden calf. The Levites have lost the privilege of submitting an offering at the inauguration of the altar. So Aaron simply believes it's because of the mistakes that he's made in the past in his life that obviously is very much still on his head. This mistake of leading the worshiping of the golden calf is so much on his head. He obviously has this guilty consciousness about it. And it really comes up out of this, of feeling left out. Maybe God's still angry at me. Maybe God's frustrated with me. But God said to Moses, tell your brother Aaron to cease grieving, for his tribe is destined for a more exalted honor. They will be the ones set up and light the menorah of the temple. So the idea here is, yes, it's true, they're not invited to bring gifts, but it's only because they have a better and more exalted honor, which is to light the menorah in the temple and to set it up each time. And I think this is a good lesson here. I think it presents such a beautiful lesson here that often we see reality based on what is in our head and what's on our mind and what are we worried about. And obviously Aaron is not seeing reality clearly here in terms of why it seems to have nothing to do with him and nothing to do with the golden calf that the Levites were not given an offering or a gift to bring on that day. Actually, it's a compliment. It's because God has a much higher duty, a much more important duty for the Levites inside the temple. But Aaron is just be able to interpret it negatively, and that shows. I mean, what happens when we sort of live with a guilty conscience all the time? I think that's why repentance is so important, because once we repent for something, we can actually move on. we can safely and beautifully move on, not sit in dread all the time and continue to feel horrible about what we've done, but actually just move on, which is honestly what God seems to be asking from our at this time. The Me'am Loez actually explains that this is why the menorah is the first thing that's brought in Parashat Beha'alotcha, right after all the narrating of all the tribal chieftains bringing gifts to the Beit HaMikdash, because of this episode. And this episode is really the connection between the end of last week's Parsha and the beginning of this week's Parsha. Mishnah Torah. We're going to learn the 11th and 12th halacha of the first chapter today. We're going to really switch topics into not until one is obligated to learn or everything like this, but rather what to learn. This is the really famous area where the Mishnah Torah sort of brings down a study program of what a Jew is obligated to actually learn every day. Of course, this does not come from the Rambam. This comes from the Talmud, and he's really just putting it in code format. But it's explicitly actually said within the Talmud itself. So I think this is really great because it shows us actually what is Torah study. What does it mean to fulfill Torah study? It's not just reading one particular book, but rather it's actually divided into 3 sections. Sound familiar? That's of course because, well, I pretty much, in some ways got some of this from inspiration from this, at least for the Daily Derech. My own personal learning model actually is very much dependent upon this. But I definitely relied on this idea in part for the Daily Derech. So, v'chayev shaleshet zman lamidato. One is obligated to split one's time for study into 3 different portions. The 1/3 should be devoted to the written law or the Torah itself. 1/3 to the oral law, and so this would include Talmud, Mishnah, Midrash, things like this. What it actually says here, and then finally 1/3 to understand and conceptualize, to 1/3 to understanding and conceptualizing the ultimate derivation of concepts from its roots, inferring one concept from another and comparing concepts. What he's saying here is, and I'm sorry, I cut off a little early. He actually says, understanding the Torah based on the principles of biblical exegesis, until one appreciates the essence of those principles and how the prohibitions and the other decisions which one received according to the oral tradition can be derived using them. The latter topic is called Gemara, or what we would say today, Talmud. So the way this is actually stated in the sources is Mikra, Mishnah, and Gemara, right? So Mikra, according to the Rambam and most authorities, say this is the Torah itself. And so that obviously needs to be reviewed, the actual 5 books of Moses. So a piece of that needs to be every day. Then there's what's called Mishnah. And in the time of the rabbis, when they were writing this, the Mishnah, yes, there might have been the Mishnah, but what they mean by Mishnah is halacha l'maaseh, practical legal conclusions that are meant to be read, to be memorized, that immediately apply to practice. So this is here what Mishnah means. And Gemara is much bigger than the text of the Talmud, just saying learn Talmud, but rather Gemara is seen in the eyes of the Rambam as a way of learning. Mishnah is just memorizing laws and seeing a long list of laws and trying to memorize it and learn it. Gemara is actually seeing how these laws are derived and deriving them themselves from the original texts, and then of course comparing them to other laws to try to understand them as part of the bigger system. These things are called Gemara. So I think it's really beautiful here that Gemara is not or Talmud is not a type of book, but rather it is a way of learning. So just taken all together, we have to be involved every day in and immersed in the stories of the Torah and the stories of the Tanakh. That's really important. We also have to be immersed every day within laws, right? Just practical laws of what to do. And finally, we also have to be involved in the logical derivation of those laws from their sources. Now, we didn't include that particular part in this Daily Derech just because it's pretty hard to do in 5 minutes on a podcast. This is something that really should be done alone and or chavruta or something like that in person. All right, so that is the 11th halacha. The 12th halacha goes on and said, how is the above expressed? A person who is a craftsman craftsman may spend 3 hours each day involved in his work and devote 9 hours to Torah study. That would be a pretty great Talmid Chacham, right? That just had to work 3 hours a day and learn for 9. Pretty crazy. In those 9 hours, he should spend 3 reading the written law, 3 the oral Torah, and 3 meditating with his intellect to derive one concept from another. So what seems to be saying is you have the Tanakh, right? And so you have to learn that. You have to learn the Mishnah. We have that. But we don't have Gemara yet because this was written before the redaction of the Gemara. And so you have to learn these 2 different texts, but you then actually construct Gemara through your own logical thinking process. So it tells us a lot about how the sages actually thought about what Talmud and Gemara is. And it also gives us access to it in a deeper way. Now, he specifically says in this particular case, that right, someone whatever time you have left, whatever time you have to study Torah should be divided into those 3 separate categories. This he says the above applies in the early stages of a person's study. However, when a person increases his knowledge and does not have the need to read the written law or occupy himself with the oral law constantly, he should study the written Torah law and the written law and the oral tradition at designated times. Thus, he will not forget any aspect of the laws of Torah. However, he should focus attention on the Gemara alone for his entire life, according to his ambition and his ability to concentrate. So, over time, the scholar learns will switch from spending from it being completely balanced to really spending more time on Gemara, on that intellectual derivation of laws, because the idea is that you're going to know the written Torah very well eventually. You're going to know the Mishnah very well eventually. But the Gemara is continuous and needs to constantly grow in every generation. Menorat HaMaor. We're going to continue learning the introduction for the first candle today, and the Hillel story actually continues here. It's not over. So if you're listening to yesterday's episode, we kind of started a story there where Hillel rose to prominence by being able to ask halakhic questions that no one else could answer. And it was, of course, he knew that because of his steadfastness in learning Torah, even when he didn't have that much money and that much wealth. But the story doesn't end here. And this is why I love Talmudic stories. One of the reasons I would say I love Talmudic stories so much, because they're never straightforward. They're never just like, oh, this is the simple lesson and this is what you get. But rather, there's always twists and turns that enable us to open up the story even deeper and actually learn more. So what ends up happening is Hillel the Elder, remember where we last left off Hillel the Elder, if you were listening to yesterday's episode, is that after he's made the Nasi, because he's able to answer the question about Pesach, he continues teaching the laws of Pesach. But he doesn't just do this. According to the Gemara here, it says Hillel the Elder began rebuking the people sharply. He said to them, "Who caused me to come up from Babylonia and become prince over you? Your own laziness, because you did not properly attend upon and learn from the 2 great sages of the generation, Shemaiah and Avtalion." And so he really is harsh here. He says, you're being lazy. You have these great sages in Israel. And I came all the way from Babylonia. You should know much more than me. But because you're not really committing to learning Torah in a deep way, you're really not understanding the Torah and able to pass it down. And so I think what he's saying in some ways is true, but just the way he says it is very harsh. And I would say not becoming of a Torah authority, of how a Torah authority should treat other Jews. And this might be stunning to some listeners because Hillel is this great hero in Jewish literature and in Rabbinic Judaism, one of the greatest, still is one of the greatest. But even Hillel had his issues, as we're going to see in a second. Then the people then asked him a practical halakha question. Rabbi, if someone forgot to bring the slaughtering knife before Shabbat, what should be done? Okay. Hillel answered, honestly, I heard this halakha, but I've forgotten it. However, leave Israel alone. If they are not prophets, they are children of prophets. So what we see here is that what Hillel is actually saying here, right? They're asking Hillel another halachic question about this case of this shchita knife, this slaughtering knife on Shabbat, whether they can go get it or not. And actually, unlike before, when Hillel was the only one who knew the answer, this time he didn't know the answer. He actually even says, I heard this halacha. I knew it at one point. But I don't remember it anymore. I've forgotten it. And so he interestingly then says, leave it to Israel. Hiniach li Israel, leave it to Israel, because if they're not prophets, they're children of prophets. So this is a kind of a saying that comes up over and over again, that even if the Jewish people are not all prophets, they're still children of prophets. And so sort of like every Jew or the Jewish people as a whole sort of have this like ability of semi-prophecy that enables them to answer questions that nobody else knows. So what happens? The next day, the people instinctively found a solution. Those bringing lambs tucked the knives into the wool of the animals, while those bringing goats placed the knives between their horns. When Hillel saw what they had done, he immediately remembered the forgotten halacha and declared, "This is exactly what I heard from Shema and Avtalion." So I think that this is what is interesting that it's trying to show is when Hillel is harsh towards the Jewish people, even if he's right about what he's saying, but he's overly harsh and he's almost pedantic towards them at this point. He begins to forget halacha because he's getting angry and he's acting overly harsh to the Jewish people. And it's amazing how God just sort of takes the Torah away from even this great wise person, Hillel, if he's not going to act up to snuff. And I think this is really important to understand that, like, even for someone who learns and commits and is very steadfast in their Torah learning, the Torah learning is not actually theirs. It really is God's. God lets us sort of borrow it for some time. And therefore, if we don't behave up to snuff, God sort of takes it away. And that shows itself through the forgetting of halakha. And it's interesting the way Hillel then fixes it. The next time he is faced, what he basically says in answering this is he sort of realizes and says, well, wait a second. What happens if instead these people who I rejected before and said weren't good actually might have the answer because they're children of prophets? And so let's go instead and just see what Israel does, because they're actually pretty great. And actually then Israel does the right halacha, and Hillel is actually able to remember that this was actually the halacha from Shema and Avtalion. And so when he's actually able to give Israel a chance, even though they haven't shown steadfastness in learning Torah, which we've said is so important no matter what, still, if one shows compassion for their fellow Jew, if one sees that their fellow Jew can come back and be better, and believes in them and believe that they have Torah to share and inside, then all of a sudden the Torah becomes remembered again. And what that's showing us here is that really love of Am Yisrael, love of and feeling real responsibility for each other causes us to keep Torah. Without that, there is no Torah. The Torah goes away. And this shows this even so beautiful, even for a sage like Hillel. As if Hillel doesn't act up to snuff, Torah goes away. So I really love this this teaching, and it's really important to me as a rabbi. Obviously, it's kind of in my head all the time. Every time I want to maybe get frustrated at somebody or at my congregants or what have you, I try to remember this teaching. I try to remember Hillel, but I just think it's so important for all of us, right? There is no wisdom, there is no Torah without having compassion for everyone. Even if the people are doing wrong, if you don't have compassion for them and speak harshly to them, all Torah goes away. And the second that rabbinic leaders, especially, and leaders in general, get harsh towards their people and speak unlovingly to them, it's okay to be strict, but harsh and mean and insulting, all of the wisdom will go away, which I think is so important for all of us to remember. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.